What if everything we think we know about reality, time, consciousness, physics, what if it's just like scratching the surface? Could there be something more fundamental underneath it all? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into an idea that asks exactly that. It's a pretty revolutionary new framework called the Unified Computation of Temporal Information Theory, UCTiT for short. Our guide here is the work of its originator, Ryan Lang. He's an independent researcher from Ireland. And we're looking specifically at his 2EV 2.0 white paper, just came out June 2025, and it lays you all the math, the science, the philosophy behind UCTiT. So our mission today, to unpack this really ambitious theory. It tries to link physics, computation, and consciousness together. We want to pull out the key ideas, give you a shortcut to understanding what this cutting edge stuff is all about. Hopefully spark a few aha moments for you. Okay, so let's get into it. UCTiT. What problem is it trying to solve? Well, it points to this gap, right, in theoretical physics. We don't really have a single model that explains how time, consciousness, and physical laws all emerge together interconnectedly. It flips the script on things like observation, entropy, computation. Doesn't see them as separate.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is how it pictures the universe. It says the universe is this dynamic interface. Think of it like a constant conversation happening between recursive symbolic computation, the universe basically calculating itself, and the structure of temporal information that emerges from that.
Okay, computation and information.
Yeah, and this whole interface, it's governed by things we can actually measure, like readings of tension, contradiction, entropy, coherence, and time itself. It argues time isn't this fixed linear thing we move through.
Right.
Instead, it's an emergent process, like a symmetry-breaking thing happening within this evolving field of information. Imagine pure potential information constantly organizing itself, and that act of organizing, that's time.
That's a really different way to think about time. Not a container, but an activity.
Precisely.
And UCTiT, it's got some big goals, right? You mentioned it's ambitious.
Oh yeah, threefold, really.
Okay.
First, it wants to formally define time and this symbolic computation as the core generative engines of reality, like the things that make reality happen.
The fundamental building blocks.
Second, it introduces these things called symbolic operators and observer-linked mechanisms. And it says these are the source of fields, physical laws, even our sense of self, our subjective identity.
Wow, okay. So the observer is central.
Crucial. And third, it aims to bring together all these different models. We have quantum field theory, cosmology, even theories of consciousness into one single coherent system, all based on testable symbolic dynamics.
So the core idea, like the elevator pitch.
It's that reality emerges from this recursive symbolic computation, happening across temporal interfaces, always under some kind of tension. And this process, it generates identity like particles or minds and physical structure and observer effects, all by resolving symbolic disagreements through something called entropic coherence.
Entropic coherence, okay.
It's meant to be falsifiable, a proper scientific bridge between physics, computation, and consciousness. The big takeaway for you listening, reality isn't just stuff, it's an ongoing symbolic calculation.
Okay, so as we dig deeper, we should listen for terms like temporal update operator.
Yes.
Symbolic recursion. Observer loop, dimensional coherence, and emergent complexity. These are like the keywords for this new language.
Just the pillars, yeah.
So how does this mesh with the science we already have, physics, information theory?
Right, well, it sees itself as extending them. Take Shannon's information theory.
Okay.
UCTiT says information isn't just static bits like zeros and ones. It's the dynamic, evolving fabric of reality's own computation, the stuff being computed.
So information becomes active.
Exactly, and thermodynamics, it gets a major reframe. Entropy isn't just disorder.
Which is the usual definition?
Yeah. Here, it's seen as symbolic decay, like the loss of meaningful recursive feedback, the story getting garbled.
Oh.
And this explains how complex systems, like life, maintain order. They do it by preserving this recursive coherence, keeping the symbolic story straight, you could say.
Interesting. And what about quantum mechanics? That's always the tricky one.
Well, UCTiT offers an interpretation. It sees quantum uncertainty, wave function collapse, all that weirdness, as reflections of unresolved symbolic recursion happening at the tiniest timescales. Like the universe is constantly making tiny symbolic decisions.
Still deciding its state.
Pretty much. And for neuroscience, it views consciousness itself as these recursive symbolic feedback loops operating across different temporal layers in our brains. So awareness just naturally emerges from all this symbolic processing. It's not some magic ingredient added on top.
It's a product of the complication.
Yes, and that brings up another point. It also leans heavily on systems theory, cybernetics. Feedback loops are absolutely core to how systems maintain their identity and stability in this framework.
So it's very different from, say, standard physics that starts with particles and builds up.
Totally different approach. Reductionism usually starts small with particles, UCTiT starts with time, and symbolic recursion as primary. And from that, matter, mind, even the laws of physics themselves are supposed to emerge.
So it's aiming high, trying to encompass things like the standard model, general relativity.
Yeah, and even more, let's say out there is like Langen's CTMU or causal Fermion systems. It sees them all as potentially specific examples, specific configurations within its bigger symbolic engine.
Right, so like any big theory, it must have some fundamental rules, some axioms.
It does. 7 core postulates. These are meant to be the irreducible principles, the computational rules for existence.
Okay, let's maybe touch on a couple of the really key ones.
Sure. Postulate 1 is pretty foundational. Symbolic ontology.
Meaning,
It basically says everything, physical stuff, thoughts, information, it's all structured forms of an underlying symbolic substrate. Everything's ultimately symbols interacting under tension.
everything is symbols. Okay,
Then there's postulate 2, recursive temporal computation model. This is where time gets interesting again. Time isn't linear, not fixed. It's a recursive interface. It's where symbolic systems update themselves.
so time comes from the updating process.
Exactly. Temporal evolution is the resolution of symbolic tension through this computation. Time is an active process of symbolic updating.
Got it. What else stands out?
Postulate 3 is huge, especially for, us, observer as symbolic compression agent.
The observer again.
Yeah, it says conscious observers, like you listening right now, emerge when symbolic information gets compressed and made coherent across these time interfaces. But here's the kicker. You're not just a result of this, you're an agent in it.
How so?
Your observation, your awareness, it actively participates in the recursion, shaping reality by resolving symbolic tension. Your act of looking changes the symbolic landscape.
Whoa. Okay, that's a big one. Participatory universe, literally.
Very much so. Then maybe postulate 4, entropic constraint and symbolic tension. This says systems evolve by trying to minimize contradiction, minimize that symbolic tension, and maximize coherent information, all within the limits of entropy.
Like seeking clarity or resolution.
Exactly, and that unified drive explains patterns we see in thermodynamics, information, even psychology. It's all connected.
And you mentioned what about identity, how selves emerge.
Ah, yes, postulate 6. Recursive identity encoding and self-similarity. This explains how distinct things, particles, minds, us, come about. They arise from recursive nesting and reflection. Systems define themselves through feedback loops, creating these bounded, self-reckon-making structures.
It's like drawing a boundary around yourself symbolically.
Precisely, that's how self emerges from the symbolic soup.
So these postulates, they form the theoretical backbone, explaining how everything from space to consciousness emerges.
That's the idea, a coherent framework from these underlying symbolic and computational rules. It's a full reimagining.
Okay, theory's one thing, but how does it become a working model? Something you can, like, test or simulate?
Right, that's where the recursive symbolic engine, the RSE, comes in.
The RSC.
Lane describes it as the pure mathematical representation of consciousness. It's where the postulates get operationalized.
So how does it work? What are the parts?
It operates by, again, recursively resolving symbolic tension and maximizing coherence. It's like a mathematical engine humming along. It defines the symbolic substrate in practical terms. For example, you have a symbolic unit called phi that represents a single coherent state, like an idea or an object.
Okay, a unit of meaning.
Then symbolic tension, psi, that's the difference in coherence between units, the disagreement or gap between them.
The conflict.
Exactly. Then there's an observer node, script O is it. This acts like a lens, compressing or expanding symbolic information.
The observer's action, formalized.
Right, and entropy, script E, is just the sum of all the unresolved tensions, the total noise in the system.
Okay, that makes sense.
And here's a really precise bit. Pure consciousness, C, it's defined mathematically as the ideal limit, where you have maximum coherence and absolutely zero unresolved tension. Think of it as the universe in perfect harmony, mathematically speaking.
The ultimate state of resolution.
Exactly. And it even includes a condition for recursive self-awareness. Self-aware equals C.
Meaning.
A symbolic state that refers back to itself. It's basically the mathematical structure for self-reference, like, I think, therefore I am.
Wow. So the RSC translates the philosophy into actual computation.
Precisely. It gives a formal, potentially testable model for consciousness and emergence.
But testable is key, right? For a theory this ground, it needs to be falsifiable. Can you prove it wrong?
Absolutely crucial. And UCTiT addresses this directly with something called the Deep Bang simulation.
Deep bang. Okay, tell me about that.
It's designed as a core empirical test. It's essentially a recursive symbolic generator. Think of it like a metaphysical Big Bang simulator.
Metaphysical, how?
Instead of starting with particles and energy, it starts with pure, raw, random symbolic sequences, just meaningless symbols.
Okay, total chaos.
Right. And then it lets them evolve purely through recursive feedback loops. It uses these tension-based symbolic operators to resolve contradictions between symbols. And the really crucial part is it models the spontaneous emergence of observers, of time arrows, even simple symbolic organisms within the simulation.
So it's watching if structure emerges from symbolic noise.
Exactly. Can meaning arise from randomness under these specific rules?
And what did the simulation show?
This is where it gets really compelling, according to the paper. Deep Bang repeatedly showed several emergent symbolic laws.
Laws emerging from the simulation. Like what?
Okay, first, the entropy compression law. Imagine starting with total symbolic randomness, like static on a screen.
Yeah.
When an observer function was active in the simulation, meaning an active process of symbolic interaction, the randomness didn't stay random. The symbols naturally started to compress to form simple repeating patterns, like clusters of plus signs or equal signs or asterisks.
So observation reduces the symbolic noise.
It seems so, as if the system, under observation, inherently organizes itself into simpler, more understandable forms.
Interesting. What else?
Recursive symmetry amplification. Patterns that did emerge tended to become more symmetric over time. Recursion seemed to prefer simplification into symmetry.
Okay.
Then observer collapse bias. The observer wasn't passive. Its presence actively biased the symbolic environment towards creating structured, repeatable forms. It influenced the outcome.
The observer effect, but in symbols.
Sort of, yeah. And the stochastic emergence law, even though it started random, structure consistently emerged when the observer was active, which points towards a kind of determinism within these symbolic rules.
Determinism from randomness if observed.
And here's the critical test, the contrast law. This is the falsifiability part.
Right.
When they ran the simulation without the observer input, the symbol grid stayed random, high entropy, unstructured.
Ah, so the observer was necessary for structure in the model.
It proved observer input was crucial for order to emerge in this specific setup. It wasn't just self-organizing noise.
That's a strong result for the theory.
And one more, the law of temporal irreversibility. Once a direction of coherence emerged a symbolic arrow of time, it didn't spontaneously reverse. This mirrors Landauer's principle in computing about the cost of erasing information. Here, the cost of reversing time is framed as the erosion of identity resolution. You lose the meaning.
So UCTiT's definition of falsification isn't just about matching numbers. It's about whether these patterns emerge or collapse.
Exactly. Did the symbolic structures appear as predicted or not? The Deep Bang simulation, according to Lane, passed these tests, which moves the theory into what he calls a predictive and constructive phase. It showed that, yes, tension-guided symbolic computation under observation can lead to structured complexity. It's a proof of concept.
Okay, simulation is one thing. But the huge question is, can this symbolic framework actually map onto the real physical universe we live in?
That's the ultimate test, isn't it? And UCTiT makes some really profound claims about those connections.
Like what? How does space-time fit in?
Okay, space-time as interface. The symbolic grid in the theory, it behaves like an emergent space-time manifold. The distances between symbols reflect information delays and how they depend on each other recursively. Space emerges from the structure of symbolic relationships.
Wow. And particles. Matter.
Particles as identity packets. Within this symbolic system, stable, evolving packets of identity emerge, and these behave like particles or quanta.
Okay.
And get this, mass isn't fundamental stuff. It corresponds to symbolic inertia, how much a symbol resists changing its state.
Resistance to change.
And charge maps to interaction polarity, how these symbolic packets tend to attract or repel.
That's a very different picture of particles. And time.
Time is recursive update. We touched on this. Time is the act of recursive symbolic reindexing. Relativistic effects, like time dilation, they emerge naturally when update rates differ across different parts of the symbolic system.
So time isn't universal. It depends on the local symbolic activity.
Exactly. And fields and forces, they arise from persistent gradients, persistent differences in the symbolic tension across the interface.
Like hills and valleys in the symbolic landscape.
Kind of. Electromagnetic fields are like recursive interference patterns. Gravity relates to tension building up recursively. Quantum fields relate to how mutable or changeable symbolic identities are.
And energy itself.
Energy is symbolic tension. Fundamentally, energy in this model is the tension within the symbolic interface, the stress in the system.
So the claim is everything physical emerges from this symbolic recursion without needing any outside scaffolding. It's all internal.
That's the core proposition, a self-contained symbolic universe generating what we perceive as physical reality.
That is incredibly bold. What are the immediate pushbacks or questions a physicist might have? How does it connect quantitatively?
That's a key challenge, definitely. Moving from these conceptual parallels, mass as inertia, charge as polarity, to deriving precise numerical predictions that match experiments, especially in particle physics. That's the next hurdle.
Making testable numbers.
Exactly. And another area is explaining things like dark matter and dark energy without just inventing new symbolic placeholders. The theory reinterprets them, but confirming those reinterpretations needs specific UCTI guided experiments or observations. It needs to make unique, verifiable predictions.
Speaking of predictions, does UCTiT predict things that, current physics like GR or quantum field theory don't predict?
It claims to, yes. It makes several unique predictions that go beyond our standard models.
Such as?
For instance, symbolic gravity lensing, not caused by mass-bending space-time in the usual GR sense, but by highly coherent symbolic patterns, recursive identity coherence, distorting the structure of the symbolic interface itself.
So symbols themselves could bend the path of information.
That's the idea. Also, symbolic entanglement. It suggests entanglement is tied to recursion resonance symbols vibrating in sync, essentially, rather than standard quantum non-locality, a different mechanism.
Interesting. What about cosmology, the Big Bang?
Big reinterpretations there. Instead of a physical Big Bang, it proposes a symbolic singularity, a state of maximum recursive potential, pure symbolic possibility.
Not an explosion, but a point of maximum potential.
Right, and cosmic inflation isn't space stretching, but recursive inflation, symbolic patterns rapidly expanding from an initial seed.
And dark matter, dark energy?
Not exotic stuff. According to UCTiT, they're recursive boundary phenomena. Dark matter could be like symbolic stabilization fields holding things together, and dark energy, the pressure of recursive overcoherence pushing expansion.
Boundary effects of the computation.
Essentially. And finally, time irreversibility. UCTiT predicts time's arrow is fundamentally built into the symbolic structure. Entropy increases directionally through these updates. Reversing time isn't just unlikely, it would literally destroy coherent signatures, it would erase meaning.
So it's not just a physics theory, it seems to make predictions about structure and organization on larger scales too.
That's a key point. It allows for prediction layers maybe not accessible to GR or QFT, things like symbolic attractors predicting regular patterns in social systems, neural networks, cognitive processes. It aims for a much broader scope.
Which brings us to the big so what? What does this mean for us, for you listening, if any of this holds up?
The implications could be enormous, extending way beyond physics labs, into technology, science, even how we organize society.
How so? If reality is symbolic computation, how does my observation affect things?
Well, UCTiT suggests our measurements, choices, awareness, they aren't passive. They actively alter the dynamics. Think about economics, psychology, even the quantum measurement problem. Our narratives, our beliefs, our biases, they can literally steer system behavior by directing that symbolic attention. We're participants in the computation.
Okay, so potential applications. What could we do with this?
Imagine symbolic engineering, completely new technologies based on recursion states instead of electricity.
Like what?
Maybe symbolic circuitry, or coherence-based computation for AI. Think self-healing materials that reorganize based on symbolic rules, adaptive buildings that learn.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Predictive infrastructure, systems using UCTiT principles to forecast systemic risk by tracking those entropy gradients we talked about.
Predicting crashes or instability?
Potentially. Predicting collapse via symbolic identity instability. Optimizing how groups coordinate using recursive coherence fields. Think about applying that to climate models or financial markets.
That's huge. And society itself.
This is maybe the most speculative, but imagine symbolic civilizations. Leadership based not on power, but on coherence metrics. Laws designed as symbolic evolution protocols.
Where harm is measured by how much it degrades coherence.
Maybe. Even cultural rituals viewed as ways to embed cultural symmetry to prevent societal collapse by refreshing core symbolic identities, the identity attractors.
And AI. How would AI fit in?
AI integration could focus on designing AI with inherent identity boundaries, systems that interact with humans based on mutual entropy flow, a kind of symbolic respect.
coevolution with AI.
And education and wisdom, learning models where you constantly reintegrate knowledge recursively, curricula designed specifically to build coherence between your internal symbolic map and the world.
Learning is building coherence.
But there are ethical considerations too, big ones.
Like what?
Well, if identity can be modeled symbolically, it can potentially be influenced, maybe manipulated. If you can simulate these tension landscapes, you could try to control them.
The potential for misuse.
Definitely. UCTiT, as presented, calls for transparency, for consent if you're modeling identity, for safeguards against predictive coercion. The goal, Lane suggests, should be empowering reflective participation, helping us understand and engage with the system, not enabling top-down control.
Okay, so we've gone on quite a journey here with UCTiT. From the nature of time and consciousness through the fabric of reality to these potential futures.
It's a lot to take in. The core idea, though, reality as a kind of grammar of recursive interpretation, written in symbolic tension, updated constantly through time. It really does paint a picture of a deeply participatory universe, where you, the self, and the cosmos are just two sides of the same ongoing recursive conversation.
So, the final thought for you, listening, what does this mean for you to chew on? If morality, in this view, is about preserving symbolic coherence, if being good means strengthening the feedback loops that build meaning and reduce contradiction, how might that kind of idea reshape how you think about purpose, about your own life, your actions, your connection to everything else? And consider this. If the entire universe is just one vast recursive symbolic loop, constantly evolving towards some kind of universal self-awareness, what's your specific part in that grand unfolding story? The loop, in a way, continues right through you.